There is a disturbing question regarding some of Nigeria's traumatized communities. If the police do not come, if soldiers arrive after the attackers have gone, and if armed men now control the farms and forests around you, can an amulet stop a bullet? Can incantations hide a village? Can ancestral spirits do what the modern Nigerian state has failed to do? This question may sound strange in Abuja, Lagos, or London. However, in a frightened rural community, it may not sound strange at all. I've heard former public officials speak of young men being cooked, ritually fortified, so that bullets will not enter their bodies. I've heard of people traveling in search of spiritual specialists who promise protections against kidnappers, bandits, and insurgents. Some tell these stories seriously, others half jokingly. But behind the stories is real terror. Tonight, on the other side, we investigate how widespread these practices are, what credible evidence actually shows, and why similar beliefs appeared during Africa's resistance to colonial conquest. We'll ask a harder question. When European firepower defeated communities that believed spiritual medicine could protect them, did that defeat help Christianity grow, or did all beliefs survive inside new Christian forms? My name is Rimamnde Shawulu. This is The Other Side. Nigeria's security is not one war. It is several overlapping crises. Boko Haram and the Islamic State West Africa province in the northeast, heavily armed kidnapping gangs across northwest and north central, Lakurawa activity around the northwestern frontier, communal violence, criminal networks operating from forests and along poorly protected rural roads. When violence becomes routine, people do not reach only for weapons. They reach for meaning, courage, and the feeling that somebody, human or spiritual, is still in control. This is important because the resort to charms is not necessarily evidence that rural Nigerians are irrational. It can be evidence that they feel abandoned. The state itself recognizes the scale of the security gap. In November 2025, President Bola Ahmed Tinubu declared a nationwide security emergency, ordered expanded military and police recruitment, approved the deployment of trained forest guards through the Department of State Services, and again urged consideration for the constitutional amendments to create state police. Those are responses based on personnel, training, intelligence, and the law. At community level, however, the immediate defender may be a farmer with a locally made gun, a hunter who knows the forest, or a vigilante with no body armor. For such a person, a charm can function psychologically like armor, even when it is not a physical armor. That distinction matters. A belief may increase courage, coercion, willingness to patrol. It does not prove that the object can stop a projectile. So how widespread is the reliance on charms, magic, or ancestral protection? There is no credible national register of communities using spiritual protection. There is no survey that allows us to say that a particular percentage of Nigerian vigilantes depend on charms. Much of the evidence is ethnographic, photographic, or journalistic. Secrecy and the mixing of traditional religion with both Christianity and Islam also make measurements difficult. But the practice is not imaginary. In May 2014, Reuters photographed traditional hunters who had gathered in Maiduguri to volunteer against Boko Haram. One hunter demonstrated what he described as the power of his charms by holding fire to his neck. The same camp contained locally made bullets and traditional weapons. Reuters reported that roughly 100 hunters had assembled and were receiving meals from the local government. Voice of America later described anti-Boko Haram vigilantes carrying clubs, machetes, and good luck charms. Yet the same report made the operational limit very clear. The vigilantes could challenge small groups and identify local suspects, but they were outgunned when insurgents arrived in numbers with pickup trucks and heavy weapons. A peer-reviewed 2024 study by Murtala Ibrahim documented protective charms among members of vigilante groups of Nigeria in Lagos. Participants described amulets against bullets known as oyeta and against blades called okigbe. Charms were also associated with oath-taking, traditional protection, interrogation, and the construction of vigilante authority. The study does not demonstrate supernatural effectiveness. What it demonstrates is social reality. Members used these objects. Ritual specialists and deities were incorporated into their security culture. And some Christian and Muslim members described the practice as an African security method. Historically, the Bakassi boys in the southeast became famous for charms of Odeshe. They believed that the body would not be penetrated. The movement gained popularity during a period of violent crime, but it was also accused by Human Rights Watch and other observers of torture, arbitrary detention, and extrajudicial killing. That is another danger. Once a militia claims supernatural power to identify guilt, ordinary evidence and due process can disappear. The pattern, therefore, is geographically broad from the northeast to Lagos, Jos, the southeast, but it is even often hidden and impossible to reduce to a trustworthy national number. Of course, when this insurgency became very serious from 2009, several communities and even highly educated people believed that their communities had so much spiritual power that they could not be bothered about whatever was happening. As a matter of fact, while the crisis started, there were some people, including intellectuals, who said that if Africans resorted to the powers that they had before, they would be able to stop the mayhem that these bandits and insurgents were bringing. And not long ago, a colleague of mine who were in the National Assembly together told me that his home, where he came from, the people were so powerful spiritually that they were going out in the night to cleanse their forests of the new franchise of Boko Haram that had established in Kwara and Niger State. A few months down the line, hundreds of people were kidnapped, freely kidnapped from those communities that he belonged to. And the people with the charms and spiritual powers were nowhere to be seen. In the same vein, some people that said that Maiduguri or Borno State was the source of so much spiritual power. Indeed, many politicians went to Maiduguri or to Borno State to seek for power to enable them win elections. So much so that it was believed that in Nigeria or in northern Nigeria, Maiduguri possessed the biggest spiritual traditional power. And several years down the line, since Mohammed Yusuf came into force and was killed by the military, of course, much of Borno State, a senator even said up to 50% of Borno State has been cleansed of people. People are no longer living there. The powers that the traditional power wielders and the spiritual wielders had did not stop Boko Haram or ISWAP from removing literally hundreds of communities and leaving the lands waste without people, becoming part of Nigeria's ever-expanding, ungoverned territories. Of course, it is true. Community defenders have sometimes made important contributions. The Civilian Joint Task Force in Borno helped identify insurgents, conduct searches, provide local intelligence, and deny Boko Haram freedom of movement in some parts of Maiduguri. But where these groups succeeded, the practical advantages were visible. Local knowledge, human intelligence, numbers, motivation, familiarity with parts and languages, and collaboration with state forces. In 2014, the Nigerian military trained some civilian volunteers in basic counter-terrorism and security procedures. Magic was the institutional response. The human cost has been severe. Reuters reported that bandits killed about 30 vigilantes in Zamfara ambush in 2022. In July 2025, at least 70 community security volunteers were killed near Kukawa and Boyom in Plateau State while moving towards a bandit hideout. In March 2026, Katsina officials described another cycle in which a vigilante patrol killed suspected bandits and armed men launched a deadly reprisal against the villages. These cases do not tell us what every victim believed or wore. They tell us something more important. Courage without intelligence and firepower can end in catastrophe. A charm may reduce fear to the people wearing it. It may also create overconfidence, encourage frontal assault, or persuade poorly equipped volunteers to enter an ambush. Bandits themselves may also use charms, but their measurable advantages are the firearms, the power of their firearms, motorcycles, communications, informant networks, money, forest camps, and the ability to exploit weak state presence. The central contest is not traditional spirituality against modern weapons. It is organized violence against an often disorganized system of protection. But for those who know history, there is actually nothing new about spiritual belief influencing military crises or actions. During colonial conquest, African communities did not possess one single worldview or strategy. They negotiated, resisted, collaborated, migrated, or fought. Religious authority could unite people, legitimize resistance, make sacrifice meaningful. In southeastern Nigeria, for instance, the Aro Confederacy combined commercial networks, political influence, and the authority of Ibini Okpabi's oracle called the Longjuju in British accounts. The Anglo-Aro War of 1901 to 1902 was driven by competing political and economic interests, British expansion, and disputes over slavery and slave trade. Religion was part of the power structure, but it was not the only cause. British forces, supported by African troops and carriers, captured Arochukwu and destroyed or damaged the oracle's complex. The Aro resistance continued in different forms, but the Confederacy's regional dominance was broken. The lesson is that a shrine failed a laboratory test. Charms, ancestral spirits, could not withstand the Maxim gun. It is the religious authority. In northern Nigeria, the Satiro uprising of 1906 grew from the Mahdi's expectation, opposition to colonial taxation, and anger among peasants, clerics, fugitive slaves, and other marginalized people. The rebels initially inflicted a serious reversal on British patrol. Britain then returned with overwhelming force. Satiru was destroyed, and colonial reprisals were brutal. The episode shows that faith can mobilize resistance and produce tactical surprise. It cannot by itself equal artillery, the Maxim gun, discipline reinforcements, or a state willing to use collective punishment. The clearest example is the Maji Maji rebellion in the German East African colony now called Tanzania from 1905 to 1907. A spirit medium became associated with Maji, that is water medicine, believed by followers to turn German bullets into water or protection. The medicine, of course, and the propaganda around it helped to unite communities divided by language and political organizations. The unifying achievement was real. The acclaimed physical protection was not real. It did not happen. At Mahenge, German forces with rifles and machine guns broke mass attacks. Germany then used a scorched earth campaign, destroying villages, crops, and food supplies. The same tactics being used by Boko Haram in much of northern Nigeria's rural areas. Tens of thousands died from violence, hunger, and disease. Estimates vary and must be treated cautiously. Spiritual medicine did not defeat machine guns, but neither was the rebellion meaningless. Maji became a language of solidarity and later a symbol in Tanzanian nationalism. For many Nigerians, faith is a legitimate source of hope. Prayer can comfort the traumatized. Ritual can bind a community. Ancestral memory can affirm identity and courage. A serious analysis will not insult these beliefs, but public safety operates on a completely different frequency. No government should deploy a volunteer because he claims he is bulletproof. No commanders should substitute incantations for surveillance. No community should send young men into a forest without communications, medical evacuations, reliable intelligence, protective equipment, rules of engagement, and coordination with lawful security agencies. The practical program is clear. Train and vetted local defenders, accountable state or community policing, rapid response units, secure communications, early warning networks, protection for informants, mapping of forest routes, regulation of vigilante groups, trauma support, and prosecution of those who supply arms and information to these violent groups. Local hunters can be valuable because they read tracks, terrain, and human behavior. These are skills community networks can identify strangers and unusual movements. that is intelligence. Spiritual belief may strengthen morale. It must never be confused with ballistic protection, and government must not exploit the romance of brave hunters to avoid its constitutional responsibility. Volunteers should supplement lawful security institutions and not become disposables. When a traumatized community turns to magic, the first question should not be, where are these groups looking backward? The first question is, who left them unprotected? History shows spiritual belief can unite frightened people, give courage, and create authority. It can help a movement endure. But the story of the arrow, the satiri, and the maji also shows the terrible cost of mistaking moral courage for physical invulnerability. The colonial gun did not prove European moral superiority. Colonial conquest was frequently violent, exploitative, and unjust. It, however, proved something much narrower. Organized technology and logistics defeat unprotected bodies. However strong the magic, you will need to ballistic power. And when there is competition between powers of technology and the powers of rituals, technology most often, all through modern history, wins. The same principle applies today. Bandits and insurgents are not powerful because their magic is stronger. They are powerful when they possess weapons, intelligence, mobility, money, safe havens, and freedom created by state failure and the expanding ungoverned spaces in Nigeria. Nigeria will not defeat 21st century insecurity by retreating from 21st century. It will do so through science, intelligence, justice, competent institutions, and communities that are protected rather than abandoned. So tell us, in your community, have people turned to charms, spiritual fortification, or ancestral protection because of insecurity? Has it offered courage, created danger, or both? Share your experience without naming the vulnerable individuals or revealing operational security information. If this investigation has helped you understand the forces shaping Nigeria beyond the daily headlines, please like this video, hit the subscribe button, and turn on notification. Your subscription helps the other side reach more viewers and continue producing factual, independent analysis. And of course, for another powerful story of courage and resistance from Nigerian history, purchase a copy of my book, The Story of Gambo Sawaba, on Amazon. The link is in the description. Discover the life of this fearless woman who confronted injustice, challenged powerful institutions, and refused to be silenced. Search The Story of Gambo Sawaba on Amazon and order your copy today. Subscribe, share this episode, get the book, and join us as we continue to look beyond the headlines. My name is Rimamnde Shawulu, and this is The Other Side.